All right, well, let's get started. Welcome back. Glad you're here. Hope your week's been going well. If you're joining us online, welcome. Glad you could join us virtually. So we're continuing our study of Job, right? It's been, I think, an interesting study. Hopefully you've I don't know if enjoy it is the right word. Hopefully you've benefited from it because it's quite a painful storyline. And so just to recap, right, Job's introduced in the story as this out-of-the-ordinary, amazing human being. He's just upright, shuns evil, is righteous, and in summary it says the greatest man of the East, right? He's just out of the ordinary. And then the narrator also goes on to describe the kind of life he has because of his faith, right? So he's got an amazing faith and then an amazing life. And there's comfort in that, I think, right? That he has what he deserves kind of thing. Like he follows in God's wisdom and path, and thus he is blessed. Then we have a glimpse into the heavens. The heavens where, in the ancient world, the gods did they went about their business. And so we get a glimpse in there, and there we see the throne room of God, Yahweh God, and a sneak peek in his management of the universe. There's God on his throne, and it says that the sons of God, or sometimes translated angels, these spiritual beings come to present themselves to Yahweh. And so then enters this interesting figure introduced or just described or called Satan. Satan. Now, of course, I think most of our minds goes to the devil, Beelzebub, Lucifer, well, maybe, right? We talked about a little bit of that, and we'll touch on that again here in a little bit. So here's this creature, this being, Satan, and God has this conversation with Satan, basically calling him to account. What have you been doing? And Satan, which literally means the accusing one, has been roaming the earth. And I think the implication is accusing, right? Prosecuting, accusing. And then Job is brought into the story, and out of that, a wager comes out of sorts. And the wager is, if Job loses everything, surely he'll give up on God. And the phrasing is, curse God. So then Satan goes, and then two different rounds in the heavens lead to consequences in this reality, in this realm. And the consequences are overwhelming, like they're intense and negative. He basically, in a matter of just moments, loses everything, 10 children included. And he responds with a couple very impressive responses, which just really fits with how he's introduced in the story. But then chapter 3, his friends show up, 3 friends show up with intent to comfort him and to guide him, and it's stated that way. So they come from a distance, they see him, they're overwhelmed. He's obviously in great pain. They're just so overwhelmed with the situation. They're in silence without any explanation or reasoning or debating the issue for a week. Then Job opens his mouth in chapter 3 and says some very intense, uncomfortable statements. For example, he wished he could just die. And he says, God won't let me. And then he goes on talking about he curses, not God directly, but finds a loophole. He curses the day of his birth, and really wished that he had never been born at all would be the best option. Which, of course, is not an option, right? He's already in the mess of it and things. And then he goes on and then goes beyond himself to ask the question, why does God give light to those that will live a life of misery? Surely God knows what's coming, and so why does God allow those people to live? And of course, then that spirals into a deep conversation between Job and his friends, because he says some very intense things, and off we go, right? We have 37 up to chapter 37 of just that go-round. And we highlighted some things. 3 main points the friends make. God is just, blesses those that deserves, and punishes the wicked. The reasoning God continues, if you are being punished, you must be wicked. Thus, come forward as we stand and sing and repent. And Job is like, actually, his 3 responses are, God doesn't always punish the wicked, so there's a little off there somehow. 2, I am actually innocent, which gets even more complicated. And 3, y'all just need to be quiet because God's the only one that can explain it, right? And like I said, 37 chapters. Then this guy, Elihu, shows up, and that's what we looked at last time. Who knows where he was at? He says he's been sitting there all along. He says he's young, but he was there to try to learn and listen. But finally he gets frustrated. The friends keep insulting and accusing Job, even though they can't really explain away what's going on. But then he spends most of chapter 32 to 37 kind of getting on to Job. Right? Getting on to Job. Job, who are you? Like, whoa, God is just. Just because you don't understand doesn't mean he's not. God does speak to you. In other words, he is speaking maybe through the pain and suffering. And who knows? Now, once again, he's then contemplating this generically, right? I don't think he's trying to explain away Job's problem. But he's like, maybe God uses pain and suffering to keep you from worse things later on. And so he kind of runs down some options. And then he disappears. Chapter 37. As he disappears, a storm approaches. Well, here's the thing. If Job, we want some answers are why Job is suffering. Actually, more broadly, we want some answers are why the innocent suffer. And then more specifically, beyond even Job's situation, we want the answers to why do I suffer? Another way to phrase that, but differently, and perhaps a little more, a rougher way of putting it, more uncomfortable way of putting it, is what I'm trying to say, is if Job is innocent, yet he's suffering, what does that say about God? In other words, there's no way around this where you don't come back to God. With that in mind, let's try to broadly answer the question, why is there suffering in the world? And I think we need to start first with me and you, or in this particular story, Job, the individual. Have we made choices? Do individuals make choices that bring pain and suffering to them? I don't think anybody's surprised about that. Well, let's look at Job, right? Job chapter 1, verse 1. The narrator introduces Job once again as this amazing man. And you're like, well, people kind of exaggerate. He's great. She's amazing. That's hyperbole, and we understand what's going on. Well, then chapter 1, verse 8, from God's mouth, he actually quotes exactly the narrator, or the narrator's quoting God, but he says the same thing. Job is indeed, verse 8, the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? There's no one like him on earth, blameless, upright, who fears God and shuns evil. Is Job responsible for his pain and suffering? Is he the cause of his pain and suffering? Well, it doesn't seem to be. His friends argue that intensely, because that would be the first place to start, is it not? If I'm counseling people, or talking to students, and just like life's full of troubles and heartaches and challenges, and I think the first place to begin is, what have you done that's contributed to that? Now, you don't phrase it that way, but that's what's really the starting point. And I would encourage you, if you're kind of contemplating and being introspective about your life, As you look back in life, what choices have you made that contribute to the mess you're in? I think that's a good place, right? Isn't that maybe the first place to start as we think about pain and suffering? I think that fits with some other things in the Bible, does it not? The whole parable of the sower, right? You know, there's sowing and then there's a reaping after that. Paul talks about God cannot be mocked in Galatians. You reap what you sow, right? From the Spirit you reap things of the Spirit. From the flesh you reap things of the flesh. Well, Proverbs is a lot about that. There's two paths, wisdom and folly, and then those paths kind of bring a life journey with it, which includes blessings and curses. Well, so yes, as we broadly look at why there's suffering in the world, I think it is a fair statement to say that choices have consequences. Yet, that does not explain the story of Job away. Well, let's move on to the next one then. If it's not me, it must be other people, right? Other people. Is that not true to why the world's a mess? Is that not one layer of it? If it's not you or whatever you've done, but beyond you, there's things people do that impact you and me. One of the very, I think, important points made early on in Genesis chapter 4, where Cain and Abel, that whole thing, Cain kills Abel, remember that? The consequence of Cain, the punishment God bestows upon Cain, and it sounds weird. You're going to go create the world you want. You're like, I don't know if that's punishment. Oh, but it is. And Cain says, he's kind of on to what's happening there. He says, well, but you know, if you push me away from you, or if you send me off, surely the next tree I turn around, somebody's going to just whack me over the head. And God says, no, that'd be too simple. I'm actually going to put a mark on you, and who knows what that was. But the mark was actually to keep him from being killed. Because I want you to live in the world you're going to create. Then he goes off and creates Cain City. Let's read the account. And he's creating Cain City, and then it gets into this long genealogy of Cain. And Cain had so-and-so, that had so-and-so, that had so-and-so, that had so-and-so. 7 generations into it, we have Lamech. Remember this story? And Lamech there, the story pauses, and Lamech he just breaks out in song. It's like a musical. Now, apparently in Hebrew, maybe it's cooler than in English, but he basically says, women of Lamech. And he has, by the way, he had 2 wives. Why not? You're just deciding whatever you want is right. So he has 2 wives, and then he breaks out in song, and he says, women of Lamech. And I'm going to paraphrase. I was on the way to the house, and some guy cut me off, some young guy, and he thought he was all tough. I got off my donkey, and I not just unleashed upon him, I killed him, graveyard dead killed him. Then he flexes. I'm taking a few licensed, creative license here. But so, and you're like, what? What's the point there? Welcome to the world Cain's created. And it's getting worse. Here's the point to this. Individual choices have collective consequences. So when kids roll their eyes at their parents and it's my life. Yeah, no, it's not. If it was, I'd say, off you go, and may the Lord bless you and keep you. Here's $20. But it's not. That's where it gets complicated. Choices you and I make, and our kids and whatever else, have collective consequences. It just does. Some of that just ripples through. Right? I wasn't around during the 60s and 70s. Well, I was into the world in the 70s. But 60s and 70s, I'm told it was quite a social experiment. Called, hippies. It was just free love, free for all. Let's see what. It was a social experiment. How's that gone? Yeah, we're still paying for it. Individual choices have collective consequences. Well, so evil people. Actually, they do play a role in the story of Job. If you go back to chapter 1, we're in that list, there's four servants that escape with their lives, just enough to come tell Job about his suffering and pain. Two of the four, verse 15 and then verse 17, come to tell stories of gang activity in the neighborhood. Right? That's the thing. There's these Chaldeans, the Sabaeans or something. They formed raiding parties. They came down upon the camels and the donkeys and they killed everybody. Off they went with it, and we alone escaped to take. Twice of the four, right? Two of the four is other people. Violence. So in part, yes, others have contributed to the pain and suffering of Job. And I'm going to guess that whatever pain and suffering you're in, because if you're human, that's the reality, some people have contributed to that one way or the other. Right? Parents, family, friends, neighbors, government, somebody. So can we just close the story? Oh, we have a lot of time. We're done, right? Evil people, story of Job, we're done. Well, no, we're not. Because then two of the four is not evil people, it's nature. Nature. Verse 16 and then 18 and 19. So nature. One of them, verse 16, while he was still speaking, there came another and said, and this is the servant's theological analysis of what happened. The fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them all, and I alone escaped to tell you. I don't know, lightning? But in his mind, who rules nature? Who rules nature? God, right? God. Well, nowadays, with the world we live in, science and whatever else, and we can predict weather. Well, I say predict very loosely, right? Because I'm still remember, what was that one year that we were going to have 12 feet of snow, and they canceled everything, and then the next day there was like 3 flurries. Y'all remember that? I was so disappointed. I was finally excited to live in Oklahoma. But, so we predict-ish, but we understand weather patterns and, pressures and uppers and lowers and spinny things. And so we get and we can predict some of that. We can understand some of that. But that's not the point here. It's who is in charge of that. And in his mind, So the worst, if I can categorize, and I think this is a fair statement, I think if you lose 10 kids, that's probably worse than losing any other investment you had. How did the 10 children die? Some wind. Stuff collapsed, dead. So maybe evil people, not Job, maybe evil people, or at least in part, and then that doesn't explain everything. And I bet if you start looking closely at your life, others aren't the reasons for all your pain and suffering. Me and you, individuals, others, but then there may be more. Right? There might be more to that. Well, so let's move down. Who else is left in the story? Well, we got Satan. Surely that's the obvious way to go, right? Satan, the devil made me do it, which, by the way, is not a valid legal, defense. People have tried, but the devil made me do it. It's theologically sound. But once again, we've looked at this. Is this Satan the Satan? Or is this Satan just descriptive, an accuser, a prosecutor? And we looked at some pros and cons, and either way, there's still some complications to it. And I don't think it just magically explains the story away because, for example, chapter 1, verse 10 and 11, here's the first go-round between Satan, whoever that is, and God. Satan says, verse 11 actually, stretch out your hand, talking to God, touch all that he has, and he will curse you to your face. But then the Lord said, very well, go out, but spare his life. So who's doing what? Is it Satan or is it God? Well, then in chapter 2, verse 4 and 5, same concept, same premise. God says, hey, Job, look, well done. Satan says, well, skin for skin. All that one has he will give for his own life. But stretch out, Satan saying to God again, stretch out your hand and you touch his bones and his flesh, and he will curse you to your face. And then the Lord said, behold, he is in your hand. So once again, it's like it's interchangeable here. Is Satan and God the same thing, or the extension of the same thing? They're like speaking to each other as if they're doing the same thing. Satan says, actually, he's going to blame you, and you go ahead and you reach out your hand, and then God says, very well, you go out and do it, but and then God puts restrictions. So who's doing what? Okay, permission. Let's take that argument. Good, that's a good one. Let's say today I brought to church my pet, my dog. Can we do that at church? Okay, Kelly, I think he said yes. So we can bring our pet to church day, right? Show and tell. And I bring my mixture of like wolf with Rottweiler and, the spawn of the devil combination. And it's this humongous dog, and I call him descriptively Killer. And his eyes glow red. And he drools angrily, and just teeth. And so I bring him with the muzzle, right? And I have him on a leash. And you're like, oh, what a dog. What's his name? Killer. Killer. Yeah, it's happened before. And you're just kind of, and you're over there with your little, Bob's got his little chihuahua and over there. And so, okay. Then I'm over here with Killer, and he's just trying to eat the podium and scratching. His eyes are glowing, and you when you look closely, he looks at you, and you feel like he's looking in your soul, that kind of feeling. Okay, and then he's just going wild as I'm trying to teach. So then I slap him across the head, and I'm like, Killer. And then I'm like, have you considered one of our elders, Kelly White? And I was like, boy down, And then I take the muzzle off, and I take him off the leash, and guess what Killer does? I'm sorry, Kelly. We're going to need to select another elder. Can we put that out there? He does what Killer does, which is, and then the rest of you are deeply traumatized. Counseling will be offered following services. The police is called in, and then interviews are starting to be made, and the question is, who killed Kelly? And the answer, of course, is Killer. Duh. So they put Killer down, and I go home. Yeah, that's not how the law works. Who's responsible? Who brought Killer to the church? Who directed Killer to Kelly? Who unleashed Killer? And who taunted Killer? I don't know. Well, then what's the obvious implication? Who's the only one left in the story that we've been kind of tapping around here? God. Chapter 1, verse 8. In a world of options, right? Kelly isn't the only one sitting here, right? In the world of options, who brings Kelly to Killer's attention in the story? In other words, who calls attention to Job in the story? God first mentions Job. What? Accuser, what have you been doing? Going throughout the earth. I think it's implied. Accusing. Have you considered my servant Job? And he doesn't stop there. If your job is accusing or prosecuting, then he says there's no one on earth like him. Beyond prosecution. Ooh, I don't know if you want to say that. He's like talking smack to Satan. Right? It's like when you're warming up at the, I don't play basketball out here. I got many talents. That's not one of them. So, you're out there stretching and stuff. Kevin, are you here? I picked on Kelly. I think Kevin might be somewhere else. But Kevin goes out and plays, right? And he's over there stretch. Kevin is what one might call middle-aged, right? And so he's over there stretching. I think he's got like a knee brace, and he rubs Bengay. Y'all familiar with that? And he's over there, and there's some of the young whippersnappers, and there's, some of the kids, and they're like 6'5", and just dunking and stuff. And then we got Kevin talking smack. What do you think is going to happen in the game? God is like, I don't know, is God like setting Job up? Well, who does Job attribute his suffering to? God. Now, not in an accusatory way, at least not the first two times around, right? Job chapter 1, verse 21, we have his first response, and it is, he says, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I shall return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And the narrator is quick to point out, in all this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrongdoing. But who is he claiming has responsibility? God. Right? Chapter 2, verse 10. Here's the second go round, and his wife gets into it. Remember, and I think she kind of personifies the version of Eve that is deceived deceiver. In Proverbs, the version of woman personified as folly. And so she kind of takes on some of that. She says to him, why don't you just curse God and die? Which is actually the exact thing of the wager. And he says, you speak as if a foolish woman. Once again, I think he's tapping into the imagery in Proverbs. And here he says, shall we accept good from God and not accept trouble? Some translations go as far in being bold and saying evil, which I think is too far. Actually, the two Hebrew words there are tov and ra. Come on, where have we heard that before? Has anybody been paying attention to any of the classes or sermons? I repeat that apparently over and over. Genesis. Thank you, Kelly. From the grave he arose. Genesis. In chapter 1 and 2, you have the tree of life, and then you have the tree of good and bad, good and evil. The two words there are tov and ra. I think the narrator wants you to go like, ooh, wait a minute. What's happening? Is this like a Genesis moment kind of choice? And I think it is. I think it is. Well, but circumstantial evidence, right? I don't think we could take God to court here and really get anything out of this, except chapter 2, verse 3. And we mentioned this already early into our study, but let's do it again. Chapter 2, verse 3. Here's the second round, right, between in the heavens, God and Satan. Again, there was a day when, verse 1, when the sons of God came to present themselves to the Lord, and the accuser came also among themselves to present before the Lord. In verse 2, and the Lord said to the accuser, from where have you come? The accuser answered the Lord, and he said, from going to and fro on the earth, and from walking up and down on it. And the Lord said to the accuser, and here's once again, have you considered my servant Job? There is no one like him on earth, blameless and upright, who fears God and turns away from evil. He still holds fast to his integrity. Like God's proud of Job sticking with it. But then there's this. Although you incited me against him to destroy him without good reason. I think we could probably take God to court. Couldn't we? Do you even have to be a good lawyer to make a case against God? Didn't he just confess to something? I'm ruining Job without reason. I'm going to guess you haven't heard too many sermons on that. A lot of people have favorite verses. That's not one of them. I'm going to guess Word Warriors on Sunday, this will not be a memory verse. I'll recommend that to Kevin, see how that goes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you kind of get stuck in that. Is God in charge? Is he almighty? Could he have done something? You might not go as far as saying he's directly responsible, but doesn't he have some role in this? Then at the same time, where would I go for comfort but God? And so the very things that make you want to go to him for comfort are also the very things that make it quite complicated. I read a book by a priest once trying to deal with this concept of pain and suffering. His ultimate conclusion was God is not all-powerful. Because if he was, he would do something. And he doesn't, not because he doesn't care, because he has some limitations. Now, he ultimately will win, but he just can't, he just can't stop everything. And I mean, like I said, it's a whole book, and I think it was a painful conclusion for him, but he just couldn't reconcile the other things. If God is powerful, all-powerful, not powerful, all-powerful, and God is good, yet the world's a mess, something's got to go. Right? Or the other option is God doesn't exist. And so what he ended up doing with is maybe God isn't all-powerful. He'll win. But it gets ugly in between. You know, I don't know. Like, I can appreciate the struggle the priest was having. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
He's on earth, and all the trial and tribulation, I know his heart.
Yeah.
You cannot turn him.
Yeah, so, that's a really good possibility. Like I said, once again, my point is it's quite messy, right? It's quite complicated. And so let's say I still have control of Killer, right? And so he gets away and he's chewing over there on Kelly, and then I'm like, checks my Twitter here real quick, and Killer, sit. Kelly, okay? I don't know. Is that worse? Better? Complicated? Come in defending. Yeah, and Job will actually say some very intense things. Like I said, he curses the day of his birth. Well, that might be just kind of a runaround. He'll then say, well, actually, that's my very next point. What does God say? What does Job say about God? And we've looked through a lot. Let me just point out three things. One is chapter 3, verse 3. Here's what he says to God. Does it seem good to you to oppress, to despise the work of your hands, and favor the designs of the wicked? Ooh, somebody's feeling brave. So what is he implying, or maybe just flat out stating? Is God occasionally completely unjust? Well, chapter 16, verse 7 and 9. Surely, how God has worn me out. Here's what he's talking about. Here's what he thinks God's doing to him. He has made desolate all my company. He has shriveled me up, which is a witness against me. And my leanness has risen up against me. It terrifies to my face. He has torn me in his wrath and hated me. He has gnashed his teeth at me. My adversary sharpens his eyes against me. He's not saying that to Satan. By the way, I could be wrong, but I think I'm not, because I've checked several times. I don't think once beyond chapter 1 and 2 does Job or his friends ever contemplate Satan. Be Satan whomever he is. They don't. That's right. They have no glimpse into the heavens. We do, and I don't know if that's been quite helpful, but, they don't bring up evil at all. They don't bring up evil at all. So is God, is he unjust? Point 2 here, is he responsible? Is he like hating on Job? Point 3, chapter 24. Verse 1, and then we'll skip to 12, but you could read 1 through 12, and it's just him articulating this in more examples and words. Chapter 24, verse 1. Here's what he says to God. Why are not the times of judgment kept by the Almighty? And why do those who know him never see his days? Here's what he's saying. If God is a judge, why isn't he setting judgment times? And why are those who are waiting upon the judgment of God to bring justice are still waiting? It's like that trial that never gets anywhere. There's all kinds of legal maneuvering being done in like a year, 2, 3, 10, 5, 15. Like, come on, get this done. And then verse 12, and like I said, you can read 1 through 12, but verse 12, from out of the city the dying groan, and the souls of the wounded cry for help, yet God charges no one with wrongdoing. Once again, man, I don't know about that. What is he saying? Just look around. People are in pain and suffering. People are just the innocent children. There's like violence and just, racism and just brutal, horrible things. And where's God? Where's God? Then, chapter 13, and this is just chapter 13. All right, it goes all the way up to chapter 37, but chapter 13, he's already fed up. Right? He's already fed up. And he says this to God, 2 things. Only grant me 2 things, O God, then I won't hide from you. Here's the 2 things. Withdraw your hand far from me and stop frightening me with your terrors. In other words, stop bullying me. And if you do, point 2, then summon me and I will answer, or let me speak and you will reply. And I'm going to ask, how many wrongs and sins have I committed? Show me my offense and my sin. If you stop bullying me, I'm going to have my day in court, and then you're going to have to explain. How you feeling with that? Once again, somebody found some manliness there, right? He's just feeling it. He's just intent. And this, once again, chapter 13. It gets worse, or he articulates it the same thing over and over and over. So, then guess what happens? The storm approaches. I'm thinking like Oklahoma storm. You ever been caught out in the storm? We're inside the house and it's already quite frightening. right? Some of these storms a while back. It's always nice when you have family nearby. My brother-in-law called us in the middle of the night, midnight, 1 o'clock. The phone's buzz, 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 buzz. I was just doing what any good, brother-in-law would. I was just ignoring it. But Becky finally pops up, and he's like, get up, tornado's coming. I was like, what? So Bob was calling us to let us know there's a tornado in the neighborhood. He was wrong, but there's a tornado in the neighborhood. So Becky pops up, and she takes off running to the storm shelter. And I'm like, I'm going to go turn the TV on. So I turn the TV on. Becky's over there, like I hear noises and stuff. And so I turn the TV on, and I'm like, I don't think there's a tornado going on here. So I walk over there, and Becky's inside the storm shelter, like halfway down the stairs, holding one of our cats, trying to take the cat with her. The cat was not happy. The cat's attacking her. And I'm thinking to myself, shouldn't we have run to get the kids? But the cat's going to be saved, right? We love the cat. So, thanks, Bob. Appreciate you caring about us. Okay, so here comes the storm. And there's no storm shelter. There's no hiding. There's no running. There's no house. There's no tent. They're like, under a tree. And then there's the storm on top of them. And if we go to chapter 38, I'm going to try what I think voice of God would be like, my best attempt. I'm thinking like James Earl Jones kind of, I don't know, maybe that's judgy of me. I just don't picture God be like, hey, y'all, what's up, So here's the storm. I don't think they know what's there's the storm. And then the Lord spoke to Job out of a whirlwind and said, who is this that darkens counsel without knowledge? Dress for action like a man, and I will question you, and you will explain it to me. If you're Job, how you feeling? How you feeling? Once again, in the middle of the storm. Seemed like just a sit-down conversation. I don't know. I pictured the friends all hugging themselves, around a tree, and Job's just, and they're over there crying for their mama. And here comes God, a voice out of the storm, and calls out for Job. Not like, where's my buddy Job? Hugs, upsies. Why does God show up as a storm? There's other options, you understand. How about a gentle breeze? The smells of lilies. An emotional support animal. What's a good emotional support animal for that world? A sheep, perhaps. You can just fluffy, just, ooh, fluffy, fluffy. Or maybe they can have one of just those like mental health moments, right? You can just sit and you do some coloring. And wouldn't that be better? Or perhaps like a grandpa-looking figure who comes and speaks kindly, like Santa Claus-looking figures, that kind, and speak softly and kindly and brings gifts. Perhaps dark chocolate. I really like those, like blueberries covered dark. It's just comfort. A nice warm cup of chamomile tea. How does God show up? Why does God show up as a storm? Now, apparently tone of voice matters. I'm told over and over tone of voice matters. I think I get this one. I don't always get what Becky's tone of voice means, but I get this one. I'm thinking God ain't happy. Anybody feeling it? Once again, a storm. And we're going to stop here. Bummer, right? I did it on purpose, right on there. We're not going to, you got to come next time. You got to come next time, right? We're going to come back. Then we're going to look at what does God say out of the storm. Pray with me. Dear God, we thank you for the opportunity to contemplate your will, to question your management of the universe, your reign, your patience with us. You're patient, you're kind, and you allow us to struggle through this. Help us to understand, and as you show up here in the story, that you might also show up in our lives, and that we can hear your voice and hear your message and learn. Thank you for God. Or God, thank you for Jesus. In your Son's holy name we pray. Amen. And thank you.